Ryu Suha did not weep the night her husband threw her into the rain. She set her house key on the granite counter, gently, the way you release something that was never truly yours. It was their third wedding anniversary. What Kang Tae-jun did not know, and what the woman chosen to replace her did not know, was that the wife they had thrown away was about to discover who she truly was. By dawn, the servant they discarded would hold the deed to every one of them, and would walk through the gates of her own $40 million Gangnam mansion, and she would never look back. The Kang household in Cheongdam measured a person by the weight of their family name, and by that measure, Ryu Suha was worth nothing at all. She had learned this slowly, over 3 years, in 1,000 small humiliations. She learned it each morning when she brewed a pot of barley tea, her late mother's habit, roasted and honest, and carried it to the breakfast table, where her mother-in-law would wrinkle her nose and demand the imported coffee instead. "Servants drink boiled grain," Madame Aki would say, never looking up from her magazine. "Though I suppose that is fitting for you." Suha would only bow her head and pour the coffee. She had a talent for stillness that the family mistook for stupidity. They mistook a great many things about her. They mistook the plain jade hairpin she wore each day for a cheap trinket, some sentimental scrap from a street stall. "Take that ugly thing out of your hair," Tae-jun had told her once, early on, when he still bothered to speak to her at dinners. "People will think I married beneath me." He did not know the hairpin was older than his family's fortune. He did not know a great many things. Her husband, Kang Tae-jun, was the only son of Baeksan Engineering, and he carried himself like a man who had built the company with his own 2 hands, though he had never built anything in his life but debt. Lately he came home smelling of a perfume that was not hers, something cold and expensive, orchids and money. Suha said nothing about that either. She had stopped expecting faithfulness around the same time she stopped expecting kindness. The perfume had a name now. Min Da-hae, the daughter of an investor the Kangs had been courting for months, a woman with a laugh like breaking crystal, and a father whose signature could keep Baeksan solvent for another decade. At the last family dinner, Madame Oki had seated Da-hae in Suha's chair and sent Suha to eat in the kitchen. "You understand," her mother-in-law had said sweetly. "We are discussing family matters tonight." "Be grateful, Suha," Tae-jun had murmured to her afterward, in the dark of their bedroom, his back already turned to her. "Without this family, without us, you are nothing at all. Remember that." She had lain awake and remembered something else instead. A low, patient voice from her childhood, telling her to keep her hands folded and her eyes soft, to never let a room see the whole board at once. She had kept that promise for 3 long years. She was so very tired of keeping it. The following afternoon, a courier came to the gate. Among the wedding invitations and the tailor's bills was a single unmarked envelope, heavy cream paper, embossed in one corner, with the name of a law firm in Gwanghwamun. It was addressed to her, to Ryu Suha, written in full, and it was sealed with wax. She slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan before anyone in that house could think to ask what it was. The eviction, when it finally came, was almost gentle. That was the part she would remember. It was the evening of their 3rd wedding anniversary. Suha had not expected flowers, she had learned not to expect anything, but she had, foolishly, made his favorite soup the way her mother once taught her, and set 2 places at the long table. The candles were lit. She was still wearing her coat from the market when Tae-jun came in with his mother a half step behind him, the way he stood when Madame Oki had already decided for him. "Sit down, Suha," her mother-in-law said. "This won't take long." They did not sit. Tae-jun could not look at her. He looked at the candles, at the soup, at the door, anywhere but her face. It was his mother who did the talking, as it had always been. The marriage had been a mistake, a charity the family could no longer afford. The papers were already drawn. Min Da-hae's family expected an announcement by the weekend, and it would not do to have a first wife lingering in the house like an old coat that no longer fit. "You'll be compensated, of course," Madame Oki said. sliding a thin envelope across the table. "We are not monsters." Suha looked at the envelope and did not touch it. Outside, the rain had begun, the thin, freezing rain of early spring that soaks you before you realize you are wet. Taejun finally spoke, and his voice came out small. "It's better this way," he said. "You'll thank me one day." She almost laughed. Instead, she reached up and touched the smooth jade at the back of her hair, the way she did when she needed to remember who she was. Then she took the house key from her coat pocket and set it on the granite counter, gently, without a single sound. She did not shout. She did not weep, or beg, or make the ugly scene they had braced themselves for. She simply gathered her one worn suitcase, already packed and waiting by the door. They must have packed it for her hours ago. At the threshold she paused and looked back at them, her husband who could not meet her eyes, her mother-in-law, wearing the small, satisfied smile of a woman certain she had won. And Suha smiled too. It was a quiet smile, almost tender, and it unsettled Madame Aki more than any screaming could have. "Thank you," Suha said softly. "Truly. For all of it." Then she stepped out into the rain, and the heavy door of the house that was never hers closed behind her. Neither of them understood why she had thanked them. They would understand by morning. The rain did not care that it was her anniversary. Suha walked to the end of the long, walled lane, where the Kang house sat among the other silent mansions of Cheongdam, her one suitcase wheeling unevenly behind her, a single bad caster dragging like a limp. She did not look for a taxi. She had 11,000 won in her wallet, and a bank account her husband had quietly emptied 2 months before, though he did not know she had noticed. She noticed everything. It was the only power they had ever left her. Noticing and waiting. She had done a great deal of waiting. At the bus stop she sat beneath the flickering shelter light and, for the first time, took the cream envelope from her cardigan and broke the wax seal. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, a few lines in a careful hand. From the office of Nam Do-ha, attorney at law. "Miss Ryu, your grandmother wishes to see you. Her time is very short now, and there are matters that cannot wait and cannot be entrusted to paper. A car is available to you at any hour. You need only call." Suha read it twice. Then she folded it along its crease and pressed it flat against her knee, as if she could smooth away the thing rising in her chest. Her grandmother. She had not seen the old woman in 7 years, not since the day Suha had chosen an ordinary life and an ordinary name, and her grandmother had let her go with a single nod, as though she had expected it. "If you must learn who loves you for nothing," the old woman had said, "then go and learn it. But keep your hands folded, never show them the whole board." Suha had thought she was being brave. She had married a man who smelled of another woman's orchids and called her nothing in the dark. She had learned all of it. For a long moment, she simply sat, a discarded wife in a wet coat, holding a letter from the one person in the world who had never once looked at her with contempt. Pride told her to tear it up. Pride, she had discovered, was a luxury only people with somewhere to go could afford. And for the first time in 3 years, sitting in the wet cold with a stranger's kindness folded on her knee, it occurred to her that she might have somewhere to go after all. The thought frightened her more than the rain did. The bus came, hissing to the curb. Suha let it pass. She was still sitting there when her phone lit up in the dark, a number she did not know, a message that made her breath catch in the cold. "This is Ju Yongsik, steward to Madame Yun. She is asking for you by name, again and again. The doctors say it may be tonight. Please, young miss. Come now, before it is too late." She did not call the car. She could not explain why, except that some stubborn, frightened part of her needed to arrive on her own 2 feet, owing no one, the way she had survived everything else. So Ryu Suha spent the lowest hours of her life crossing the city in the rain. She took the last bus east until the fare ran out, then walked. The Gangnam she moved through at that hour was not the Gangnam of glass towers and valet lines. It was the underside of it, the shuttered stairwells, and the blue glow of a 24-hour convenience store where a thrown-out wife could stand out of the rain and pretend to shop. She counted the coins in her palm beneath the fluorescent light. Enough for a hot barley tea in a can, or for nothing at all. She bought the tea and wrapped both hands around it and did not drink it, only held it for the warmth, and caught sight of herself in the dark window, a small woman in a soaked coat with a broken suitcase, 30 years old and worth nothing at all, if you measured her the way the Kangs did. Her feet had gone numb somewhere back along the road. In the pocket of her coat her wedding ring sat where she had worked it off her finger at the bus stop, and its small, cold weight felt heavier now than the whole of her suitcase. For one long moment the exhaustion nearly won. There was a goshiwon across the street, a room the size of a coffin for 10,000 won a night, and she had just barely enough. She could disappear into it. She could sleep, and in the morning she could be no one, safely, forever. It would be so easy to stay small. She had become so very good at staying small. That was the cruelest thing they had done to her, she thought, standing there in the humming light. Not the contempt itself, but how grateful they had taught her to be for the little space they allowed her. Then her phone buzzed again. Not a message this time. A photograph. An old woman in a white gown, propped against pillows in a room that was plainly no hospital, gilded and vast, her hair thin and silver, and her eyes closed. And clutched in one paper-thin hand, resting on the blanket, was a jade hairpin, the twin of the one in Suha's own hair. Beneath the photograph, 3 words from the steward. She kept hers. Suha's throat closed. Across 7 years of silence and pride, the old woman had been holding the same small green stone. She left the tea on the counter. She walked into the street and raised her hand for the first taxi she saw, and when the driver asked where to, she read him the address on the lawyer's letter, and watched his eyebrows climb toward his hair. "You sure, miss?" he said. "That road. There's only the one house up there." "I'm sure." The city fell away behind them. The taxi climbed, past the last of the streetlights, up a private road cut into the hillside above the district, where the rain thinned, and the lights of Seoul spread out below like spilled treasure. And then the house appeared, and Suha forgot how to breathe. It was not a house, it was an estate, pale stone and black iron, set behind a wall longer than the whole of the Kang property, its tall windows glowing gold against the wet dark. The taxi stopped at a gate that could have admitted a truck. Suha paid the man her very last note and stepped out with her broken suitcase into the shadow of a fortune she did not understand. She had barely reached the intercom when the great gates began to part on their own, sighing inward. A man was waiting in the courtyard beyond, elderly and straight-backed in a dark suit, an umbrella already open and extended toward her against the rain. She knew, somehow, before he spoke, that he had been standing there a long while, that he had been waiting for her for years. He bowed, very low, the way one bows to no ordinary guest. "Miss Ryu," said Ju Yongsik, his voice thick. "Welcome home. We had almost given up hope." The inside of the house was warm, and it smelled of medicine and cut chrysanthemums and, beneath both, of old money, that particular scent of beeswax and cedar and thyme. Suha followed the steward through rooms she could not take in, past portraits of faces she half recognized in the line of her own jaw, up a staircase that curved like something out of a film. Her broken suitcase she had left at the door. It looked absurd there, that suitcase, everything she owned in the world, small enough to carry in a single hand. At the end of a long gallery, a door stood open, and lamplight spilled across the floor. The room beyond was enormous and hushed. A nurse rose from a chair and withdrew without a word. A woman in a charcoal suit stood by the window with a leather folder held against her chest, sharp-eyed, perhaps 50, and she inclined her head to Suha with a respect that made no sense at all. And in the center of it, in a great carved bed, banked with white pillows, lay the old woman from the photograph. She was so much smaller than Suha remembered. 7 years had folded her inward, but when the papery eyelids lifted, the eyes beneath were the same, black and clear, and terribly awake, and they found Suha across the room and filled at once with tears. "You came," Madame Yun whispered. "You came, my Suha. I was afraid I had taught you too well." Suha's legs carried her to the bedside without her permission. She sank down and took the frail hand in both of hers, and the years and the pride and the rain all broke at once. And she was weeping, she who had not wept when they threw her out, she who had smiled at the door. "Halmione," she managed. "Grandmother. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have come, I should have." "No." The old woman's grip tightened, astonishing in its strength. "No, child. I sent you away. I let you go and live small and be no one. And find out whether a single soul in this world would love Ryu Suha when she had nothing at all to offer them." Her thumb moved across Suha's knuckles. "Tell me, did you find him? The one who loved you for nothing?" Suha thought of her husband's back turned in the dark. She thought of a house key on a cold granite counter. She could not speak. She only shook her head. Once. Something crossed the old woman's face then, grief and fury, and a fierce, flaring love all at once. "Then it is finished," she said. "The experiment is over, and I am glad of it. Listen to me now, Suha, for I do not have the breath to say this twice." She lifted her free hand, trembling, and touched the jade hairpin at the back of Suha's head. "You have worn this every day, even when they laughed at it. Even when they called it a peasant's trinket." A thin smile. "It is the seal of our house. There are only two in all the world. I pressed one into your hair the day you learned to walk, and I kept the other, and I have held it every single night you were gone." Her eyes moved to the woman by the window. "Doha, tell her what she is." The woman in the charcoal suit stepped forward. "Miss Ryu," she said, her voice steady and clear. "My name is Nam Doha. I have had the honor of serving your grandmother for 19 years. Your grandmother is Yun Sonja, founder and chairwoman of Chonghae Holdings." She let the name land. "You are her only living blood. As of tonight, you are sole heir to everything she has built. This house, the company, all of it. It has only ever been waiting for you." The words would not fit inside Suha's head. Chonghae. Even she knew that name, the way one knows the name of a mountain, a holding company so vast and so private that its reach was a thing people guessed at and never quite saw. Ports, towers, banks, and she, a woman with 11,001 and a broken suitcase, was... "Breathe, child," her grandmother murmured, watching her. "You were born to it. You simply were not ready to be believed." The old hand rose again to Suha's cheek. "I am giving you the whole board now, every piece, and this time you may show them. Do you hear me? You have folded your hands long enough. Let them see the queen. Let them all finally see." "Halmione." Suha gripped the hand tighter, as though she could hold her in the world by force alone. "Stay. Please. I've only just found you again. Please. Stay. There is so much You have everything," Yun Sonja said. "That was all I ever wanted." Her eyes drifted closed. The fierce grip in Suha's hands gentled, and then, between one breath and the one that did not follow it, went still. The room was very quiet. Somewhere far below, a clock chimed the hour before dawn. Suha stayed bent over the still hand for a long time, and no one in that great house moved to hurry her. When at last she lifted her head, her face was wet, but something in it had changed. Some soft and pliant thing had cooled and set, the way metal sets when it is poured into a mold. Nam Doha waited until Suha's eyes found hers. Then she opened the leather folder, drew out a single page, and laid it on the blanket where the old woman's hand had rested. "Chairwoman," she said quietly, and the title made Suha flinch, because it belonged to her now. "I am sorry to bring business into this hour, but there is one matter your grandmother instructed me to place before you, the moment you took her seat, and no later. She was very precise about it." Suha looked down at the page. It was a list of holdings, of debts owned and companies leashed, dozens of them, and near the very top, Underlined once in her grandmother's failing hand was a name she knew as well as her own: Baeksan Engineering, the company your husband's family owns, Nam Do-ha said, the one they told you they could no longer afford to keep you. A thin, cold pause. It has been kept alive for 6 years by loans from a fund your grandmother quietly controlled. They do not know the money is ours. They do not know that you, tonight, have become the only thing standing between them and the end of everything they have. She closed the folder. So, what would you like to do? They buried Yoon Sunja 3 days later, on the hillside behind the estate, in a private ceremony with fewer than a dozen mourners and a wall of reporters held back at the foot of the road who did not yet know whose funeral they had come to photograph. Suha stood at the graveside, in borrowed black and learned, in pieces, who her grandmother had truly been. Nam Do-ha told her most of it, in the long quiet evenings in the study, over files that never seemed to end. Yoon Sonja had built Chunghae from a single freight office in the ruins after the war, a young widow with a ledger and a refusal to be pitied. She had bought her first ship at 30. By 50 she owned the water it sailed on. She had done it with no husband, no family name to trade upon, and never once letting a rival glimpse the whole of what she held. The habit had hardened into a philosophy, and the philosophy she had pressed into her only grandchild along with a jade hairpin. Suha's mother, Seonja's only daughter, had married for love, or what she had believed was love, a charming man who had counted the family's money before he ever counted her heart. He bled the daughter dry and left when Suha was 4, and Suha's mother had died young and quiet of an illness the doctors named, but Seonja always privately called heartbreak. After that, Do-ha said, your grandmother made a decision. She would not let the same thing happen to you. She would not raise you as an heiress to be circled by men who smelled the fortune before they ever saw the girl. She turned a page. So she raised you plainly. She gave you your father's discarded surname, Ryu, and a modest life, and she let the world believe the Chunghae line had ended without an heir. She sent you out to be ordinary, to be loved, or not loved, for nothing but yourself. Suha thought of her whole small life, the rented rooms, the illustrator's wages, the careful budgets kept in a notebook. She had believed she was simply poor. She had been, all along, an experiment in whether anyone would love her when she was. And Kang Tae-jun? She asked. Something flickered behind Do-ha's composure. When you married, your grandmother did not interfere. It went against everything in her nature to stand back, but she did. She only watched, and when she saw that the family you had married into was quietly drowning in debt, she made a choice I argued against. Do-ha's jaw tightened. She bought their debt, all of it, through a fund with no name upon it. She kept Baeksan Engineering alive, year after year, so that your husband's family would never have a reason of money to be cruel to you. She wanted to see whether they would treat you kindly when there was nothing to gain by it, whether he would. The silence in the study was very complete. She kept him rich, Suha said slowly, so that if he was ever kind to me, we would know it was real. Yes. And he threw me out anyway, for a richer marriage, while her money was the only thing keeping his family off the street. Yes, Do-ha said quietly. He did. Suha found she was not weeping. She had thought she might, learning all of this, but instead something settled in her, cold and clear and almost peaceful, like the surface of a pond after the last ripple dies. For 3 years, she had believed herself the smallest person in every room she entered. She had been, the entire time, the reason those rooms had a floor to stand on. In the days between the death and the burial, Suha wandered the great house at night, unable to sleep, learning the shape of a life she had been kept outside of. She found rooms she was never meant to see. A study lined with 40 years of leather ledgers, a locked cabinet Ju Yongsik opened for her without a word, containing every school photograph she had ever taken and every childhood drawing she had ever made, saved and dated in her grandmother's precise hand. The old woman had watched over her for 26 years, and for the last 7, since Suha had walked away into an ordinary life, had never once let herself reach out, because reaching out would have meant the test was over. On a side table by the bed where Seonja had died, Suha found a single silver frame turned face down. She righted it. It was her mother, young and laughing on a beach, a woman Suha barely remembered, and tucked into the corner of the frame, small and faded, a second photograph, a serious child of 4, with a jade hairpin too big for her, scowling at the camera. Suha held it a long time in the dark, and understood, finally, that she had never been abandoned. She had been guarded, from very far away, by someone who did not know any gentler way to love. It was in the study, on the second of those evenings, that she met Seon-jae. He came in quietly, a tall man near 40, in a suit that had plainly been slept in, and when he saw her he stopped, set down the papers he carried, and bowed with a depth that startled her. "Chairwoman," he said, "forgive me, I have wanted to say that word to your face for 11 years. He was," Nam Do-ha explained, "the chief executive of Chung-hae's operating companies, the man who ran the ports and the towers day to day, while Seonja held the whole from her hillside. He had been the old woman's protege since he was 30, and, it turned out, he had met Suha once before, long ago, though she did not remember it. A rainy afternoon at Seonja's house, when Suha was 19, and Jaeha a nervous new hire waiting to be interviewed. The chairwoman's quiet granddaughter had risen without being asked, and brought the shivering young man a cup of hot barley tea, and told him the fear would pass. It always passed. He had never forgotten it. He had spent 11 years working for a woman whose heir was only a rumor, privately hoping the rumor wore that granddaughter's face. "She spoke of you constantly," he said. "You were the one subject on which the chairwoman allowed herself to be sentimental. Half this company would walk into the sea for you, and they have never even met you." A small, tired smile. "I would ask you not to test that." Suha did not know what to do with the way he looked at her. Without an ounce of contempt, without wanting anything from her that she could name. She was not accustomed to it. She would have to grow accustomed to a great many things. She spent those days learning her own power, the way one learns a new language, clumsily, and then all at once. She read until her eyes burned. She asked questions that made Nam Do-ha's eyebrows climb, and Seon-jae lean forward in his chair. She was not, it turned out, stupid. She had only spent 3 years being told she was, by people who needed her to believe it. The mind that had noticed everything in the Kang house, every slight, every number, every quiet cruelty, turned out to be very good indeed at reading a balance sheet. On the morning after the funeral, Nam Do-ha gathered them in the study and read the will aloud, though it took less than a minute, because Yoon Sonja had never wasted a word in her life. Everything to Suha. The shares, the ports, the towers, the banks, the house on the hill, and a single line at the end, in the old woman's own hand, that Do-ha read without inflection, and then had to read again. "To my granddaughter, who was always worth more than the whole of it, I leave the one thing I could never buy her, which is the freedom to stop pretending." There was no one else named. There was no one else left. The lawyers of 3 countries had spent decades assuming the Chung-hae fortune would shatter at Seonja's death, carved up among rivals and revenue services. Instead, it passed whole and silent into the hands of a woman who, 1 week before, had been counting coins for a can of tea. Suha listened to the line about pretending and folded her hands in her lap, out of 3 years of habit, and then, deliberately, unfolded them. 3 evenings after the funeral, Nam Do-ha laid a heavy cream card on the desk before her. It was an invitation, engraved and gold-edged, the kind that cost more than most people earned in a week. Suha recognized the Kang family crest at once. She had poured coffee beneath it for 3 years. "The engagement," Do-ha said, "Kang Tae-jun and Min Da-hae. The families announced the alliance formally in 3 nights' time, at the Hansol Grand in Gangnam. 400 guests." She paused. The Min family are wealthy, but they are cautious. They have been asking hard questions about Baeksan's finances. The Kangs are desperate to reassure them. And to do that, they need to prove their mysterious backer, the fund that has carried them for 6 years, is solid and will keep flowing. Suha looked up. They want the fund's owner to bless the marriage. They have been begging for it for weeks, Doha said. They have no idea who they are begging. They only know the fund has agreed, at last, to send its principal in person to the gala. Something moved across Suha's face then that would have frightened the Kangs very much had they been there to see it. It was not rage, it was worse than rage. It was calm. Then I accept, she said, and picked up the jade hairpin from the desk, turning it once in the lamplight. Tell them the chairwoman of the fund will be delighted to attend. Tell them she is very much looking forward to meeting the family. The next morning, for the first time, Ryu Suha went to work as the woman she truly was. Chunghae Holdings occupied the top 11 floors of a black glass tower in Yoedo, above the river, above the very banks that borrowed from it, without quite knowing they did. Suha rode up alone in a private elevator, watching the city drop away beneath her, and when the doors opened on the highest floor, a corridor of people stood waiting. Executives, secretaries, the quiet machinery of an empire, and all of them bowed at once, a sound like wind moving through a field of grain. She had dressed with care, not in the borrowed black of the funeral, but in a suit the color of dove-gray stone, cut clean and severe. She had put her hair up herself that morning and fixed it with the jade hairpin so that the seal of the house sat plainly at the back of her head for anyone who knew how to look. She had spent 3 years making herself small enough to be overlooked. She was finished with that now. They led her to the chairman's office, a vast and silent room with the whole of Seoul laid out beyond the glass, and to the chair her grandmother had occupied for 40 years. Nam Doha and Soeun Jaeha came with her. On the desk waited a single document and a heavy brass seal. "Once you sign," Doha said, "it is done. You are chairwoman, in fact, not only in blood, every share, every vote, every fund, including the one that holds Baeksan." She set a pen beside the page. "Take whatever time you need." Suha did not need any time. She had already taken 7 years. She signed. The pen moved without a tremor. She pressed the seal into the red wax herself, the way her grandmother would have, and when she lifted it away, the whole room seemed to exhale. Word went out through the building within the hour, and through the markets by afternoon. Chunghae had an heir, and the heir was a woman no one had heard of, and the share price, which had wobbled at the rumor of the old chairwoman's death, steadied and then climbed, because the analysts who had feared a leaderless empire did not yet know they had reason to fear something else entirely. On the 41st floor, the old guard of executives came one by one to bow to her, and to take her measure, and to leave again, each of them faintly unsettled by how little she gave away. Then she sat in the chair, folded her hands upon the desk, and for a moment simply allowed herself to feel it, the strange new weight of being, for the first time in her life, the most powerful person in the room, and no longer hiding it. "There are decisions to make about Baeksan," Nam Doha said. "The loans mature on a rolling schedule. You could call them tomorrow. The family would be insolvent within the week, publicly, messily. It would be entirely legal and entirely deserved." "No," Suha said. Jaeha glanced at her. Doha waited. "Not tomorrow, not messily." Suha turned the brass seal slowly in her fingers. "If I ruin them quietly, in an office, with paperwork, only I will ever know what happened. They will tell everyone I was cruel and grieving and half mad with it, and they will make themselves the victims of a heartless woman." She looked up, and her eyes were very clear. "They wanted an audience for my humiliation. They seated another woman in my chair and sent me to eat in the kitchen. So they will have their audience. I will simply be standing where they never thought to look for me." She set the seal down. "We do nothing to Baeksan until the gala. Let them spend 3 more nights certain they are saved. Let the Min family arrive believing they are marrying into a solvent house. And then, the faintest smile, the one that had unsettled her mother-in-law at the door. Then the fund's principal will arrive, precisely as promised, and bless the union in person. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Seon-jae-ha, very quietly, began to laugh, a low and admiring sound, and pressed his knuckles to his mouth to stop it. "Forgive me," he said. "It is only—" The chairwoman used to say something. She said the mistake everyone made was thinking she wanted to win. Winning, she said, was easy. What she wanted was for them to understand, at the exact right moment, that they had already lost. He shook his head. "You are very much her granddaughter." "One more thing," Suha said, rising. "Baeksan employs 400 people. Engineers, welders, clerks, men and women who never once were cruel to anyone. When the family falls, they are not to fall with it. I want a plan on my desk to protect every ordinary worker in that company. The family loses everything. The people who actually built the thing lose nothing. Is that understood?" Nam Doha wrote it down, and something in her severe face had gone soft, almost proud. "Yes, chairwoman." Suha walked to the glass and looked out over the city that had thrown her into the rain 3 nights before. "The Kang family is about to lose everything they have," she said almost gently. "And they still do not know that I exist." Word of the fund's answer reached the Kang house like sunrise after a long night, and for 2 days the family did nothing but prepare to be saved. Madame Oki had the Cheongdam mansion scrubbed from the cellars up. She hired extra staff, ordered lilies by the crate, and stood over the caterers like a general at a border, because the principal of the fund that had carried Baeksan through 6 silent years had at last agreed to appear, in person, at the engagement gala, and to signal before 400 witnesses that the money would keep flowing. It was everything. Without that signal, the Min family would walk, and if the Min family walked, the truth about Baeksan's rotten books would follow them out the door, and the Kangs would be finished. There was an irony to it that not one of them could see. For 2 days, the household scrubbed marble and arranged flowers, and rehearsed its gratitude, all to welcome a savior whose face they already knew, and had already thrown into the street. The same maids who had once cleared away Ryu Suha's plate now polished the silver for a stranger's blessing. The very chair she had been forbidden to sit in was reupholstered and set at the head of the table for the guest of honor. Madame Aki walked the rooms with a critic's eye and found them, at last, worthy, and told herself the family's luck had finally turned, and never once felt the cold breath of the thing that was climbing the hill toward her, dressed in stone gray and wearing a small green pin of jade. "Whoever they are," Madame Oki told her son, straightening his collar before the hall mirror, "you will smile at them as though they hung the moon in the sky. You will thank them for their faith in this family. You will be charming, Taejin, even if it pains you. Do you understand me?" "Yes, mother," said Kang Taejin, who had a different problem entirely, and had not yet found the courage to name it aloud. The problem was that he was still married. He could not announce an engagement to Min Daha while he had a wife, and his wife had walked out into the rain 3 nights ago, and simply, completely, vanished. Ryu Suha had gone to none of the places a discarded woman was supposed to go. She had no family that he knew of, no friends the household had ever permitted her to keep, no money, he had seen to that himself. She should have been the easiest thing in the world to find, a small drowned creature washed up in some cheap motel, ready to sign whatever paper he set before her, for the price of a warm meal and a train ticket home. Instead, there was nothing. Her old phone had been disconnected. The little studio where she had once drawn had not seen her in months. It was as though the rain had dissolved her and washed her down a drain. Taejin sent 2 men to search. He told his mother it was handled. He lay awake beside a future he could not yet legally claim, and told himself the sick feeling in his gut was only nerves. Once, near dawn, he almost let himself remember the way she had smiled at the door, that quiet, terrible smile, and the thanks she had given them that made no sense at all, and a cold thread pulled tight low in his belly. Then he pushed it away, because there was far too much to lose to be haunted by a woman who had nothing. He did not know that his wife's legal affairs had, that very week, been taken up by the offices of Nam Doha. He did not know that, when the response to his hastily filed divorce petition arrived, it would come on the letterhead of the most feared corporate counsel in the country, and that his own lawyer would go gray reading it and beg him, in a strained voice, to wait, to please just wait until after the gala, before he pressed anything at all. His men did find one thread, in the end, though they never understood what they held. A junior investigator traced a bank transfer, a modest severance the family had wired to Suha's old account to keep the divorce clean, which she had refused, and which had been quietly sent back 3 days after the eviction, routed through a law office in Gwanghwamun. The office of Nam Doha. When Taejun's man telephoned to ask, politely, on whose authority the firm was handling the affairs of one Ryu Suha, he was placed on hold, and then a cool voice informed him that the firm did not discuss its clients, that any further contact should be made in writing, and that the family would find it in their interest to be patient. The man reported all of this to Taejun, who frowned and turned the name over in his mind, Nam Doha, Nam Doha. Certain he had seen it somewhere in the financial pages, and unable to place it, and far too consumed by 400 guests and a marriage he could not yet legally make, to chase a ghost through a lawyer's switchboard. He told himself it meant nothing. He was very good at telling himself that things meant nothing. It was, in the end, the habit that ruined him. Min Dahai, for her part, was not a woman troubled by ghosts. She came to the Cheongdam house the afternoon before the gala to inspect it, the way one inspects a property before purchase, and walked its halls with her father's cool, assessing eyes. She paused in the dining room, where a first wife had once been sent to eat in the kitchen, and ran a finger along the long table. "They tell me the previous one was very meek," she said to Madame Aki, not troubling to lower her voice. "A little grey mouse of a thing. However did she last 3 years?" "She knew her place," said Madame Oki, pouring the coffee herself, now that there was no one beneath her to pour it. "When she stopped being useful, we corrected the arrangement." Da-hee smiled her breaking crystal smile. "How practical you all are. I do like that in a family." She set down her cup. "My father only wants to see the money is real, and then we may all be practical together forever." Her father wanted rather more than that. Min Sang-woo was a careful man who had grown rich by trusting nothing he could not name, and a savior with no name troubled him deeply. That same afternoon, across the river, an investigator he had quietly hired was pulling the first thread loose from a knot the Kangs had never even known was there. Across the city, in the black glass tower above the water, Ryu Suha was learning to hold the whole board without letting her hands shake. She worked past midnight and past that. Nam Doha taught her the shape of the empire, the ports and the banks, and the quiet leverage that moved beneath ordinary life, like current beneath a calm sea. Soyeon Jae-ha taught her the people, who could be trusted, who was loyal to the memory of her grandmother, who would bear watching. The staff of Chung-hae, who had braced themselves for a spoiled stranger or a frightened girl, found instead a woman who remembered every name the first time she heard it, and who, on the second night, when the kitchens had closed and the analysts were still bent gray-faced over their screens, wandered in herself, boiled a great pot of barley tea, and carried cups of it out to their desks with her own 2 hands, the way she had once carried coffee to people who despised her, except that these people looked up at her, as though she had handed them something holy. "You don't have to do that," Jae-ha said, finding her in the kitchen, sleeves pushed to the elbow, waiting on the water. "There are 40 people in this building whose entire job is to do that." "I know," she said. "I spent 3 years being one of them. I would like to remember it was never beneath me." She poured him a cup without asking whether he wanted it. "Sit. You look worse than I do, and I have been dead on my feet since Tuesday." He sat. He took the tea. For a while neither of them spoke, and it was not uncomfortable, and Suha understood, with a small shock, that it had been years since silence in another person's company had not meant a held breath, a bracing for the next unkindness. "You are afraid," Jae-ha said at last, not unkindly. "Of the gala, of walking back into that room. Yes, she admitted, and it surprised her, the ease of saying it. For 3 years that world made me feel like nothing at all. I keep waiting to feel like nothing again, the moment I put the dress on. She turned the cup in her hands. Is that not absurd? I could buy the hotel out from under them. I could buy the family twice over, and some part of me is still the woman eating alone in the kitchen, listening to them laugh through the wall. That woman, Jeha said carefully, is the reason 100 people in this building would follow you into the sea tomorrow. Your grandmother was respected. She was also feared, and a little alone, to the very end. He set down the cup. You are the first Chunghae anyone has ever wished to bring a cup of tea to. Do not be so quick to bury the woman in the kitchen, chairwoman. She is the best thing you are carrying into that room. Suha looked at him a long moment. This man who kept saying true things she had no defense against, and felt something turn over quietly in her chest that she had no time for, and set gently aside, for later, if there was to be a later. The next morning, she did a thing that was not on any plan Nam Doha had drawn. She put on the plainest coat she owned, a gray wool thing from her old life, and she went, unannounced and unrecognized, to the Baeksan engineering yard on the western edge of the city, where 400 workers built the things the family took the credit for. She told the gate she was a clerk from an auditing firm. No one looked twice at a small quiet woman with a notebook no one ever had. She ate lunch in the workers' canteen, at a long steel table, among welders with burn-scarred forearms and young engineers gone prematurely gray, and she listened. The rumor was already in the air, the way rumors always reach the bottom first and the top last. The company was in trouble, the min money might not come, there would be layoffs by spring, and the men with families were doing the arithmetic of fear over trays of cheap rice. My boy starts university in March, an older foreman said heavily, to no one in particular. 22 years I've given this place. If it goes under, the family lands soft, they always do. It's us that hit the ground. Suha knew that foreman. His name was Shin, and 3 years earlier, at a Baeksan groundbreaking she had been trotted out to smile at just after her wedding, he had been the only person on the whole site who noticed the new young wife standing alone and cold, and had quietly brought her a paper cup of coffee and told her to stand out of the wind. He did not recognize her now. Why would he? She had been nothing to look at then, and she had made very sure of it. She said nothing. She finished her rice, and that evening she added 3 lines in her own hand to the protection plan on her desk, and underlined the foreman's name, the way her grandmother had underlined Baksan. She had sat among them for an hour, invisible as she had always been, and she had felt something she did not expect. Not pity, but kinship. These were the people the family had never once thought about. The hands beneath the name, and she had been one of them. A pair of hands in a great house, pouring the coffee, keeping the books, holding the whole thing upright, while being told she was nothing. The difference between her and the foreman named Shin was an accident of blood and a jade hairpin, no more. She did not intend to forget that. Whatever else she did with her grandmother's empire, she would not run it the way the Kangs ran Baeksan, from a great height, blind to the people who held the floor up. She left the canteen the way she had come, unnoticed, and no one at that steel table ever knew that the small, quiet woman with the notebook had just decided, over a tray of cheap rice, to save every one of their livelihoods. By the time she returned to the tower, Nam Doha was waiting, with her mouth set in a hard, flat line. The Min family are more careful than the Kangs, she said. Min Sang-woo does not trust a savior he cannot name. His investigator is good, chairwoman. In 2 days the man has traced the fund to a holding structure, and the holding structure to a name he was never meant to reach. She laid a photograph on the desk, a nondescript man in a parked car. He has found Xionghae, and a chairwoman lately deceased, and a rumor, only a rumor so far, of a hidden heir named Ryu. He does not yet know it is me, Suha said. Not yet, by tonight he may. Doha's eyes met hers steadily. We could move the timeline, Act against Baeksan this morning, quietly, on paper, and have it finished before the man ever reaches the truth. Safer, cleaner. Suha considered it. Then she shook her head, slowly, and the calm in her was total. No, she said. Let him find it. Let him walk into that ballroom knowing exactly how much danger his precious alliance is in, and let the Kangs walk in knowing nothing at all. That is the shape of the thing. She rose and crossed to the window. I don't want to win in an office, Doha. I told you that. I want them all in one room. The husband who threw me into the rain, the woman who took my chair, the mother who sent me to the kitchen, and the careful man who tried to buy himself a solvent son. I want every one of them standing under those chandeliers, smiling, certain, one single heartbeat before they understand. She turned back from the glass. There is one more thing. Min Sang-woo is the careful kind of frightened man, and frightened men reach for the regulators when they have nothing else left. Before I dress tonight, I want every filing on the Baeksan Fund sent to the Financial Supervisory Service, in full, 6 years of disclosures, every one, every date. Not because we have anything to hide, but because I want it already sitting open on their desks when he telephones them in a panic tomorrow morning. Nam Doha's pen paused over her notebook, and something almost like a smile touched the corner of her severe mouth. You are defending against a move he has not yet made. He'll make it, Suha said. Men like him always do. I would simply rather be 3 steps ahead of the room than 1 step behind it. She watched the river move far below, silver in the failing light, and reached up to touch the jade at the back of her hair, the way she did when she needed to remember exactly who she was, except that now, the gesture meant something new. Have the car ready at 7, she said, and send for the gray dress, the one that looks like carved stone. A pause. Tonight, they all learn at once. The grand ballroom of the Hansol Grand blazed like the inside of a jewel. 400 guests moved beneath chandeliers the size of small cars. The wealth of Gangnam poured into silk and diamonds, and at the head of the room, on a low dais banked with white lilies, stood the 2 families who believed the night belonged to them. Madame Okhi glittered in gold. Kang Tae-jun stood stiff in a tailored tuxedo, with a smile fixed to his face like a nail. Beside him, Min Da-hai shone in bridal white she had no right to wear yet, and her father, Min Sang-woo, stood a little apart, not smiling at all, his eyes on the great doors at the end of the hall. The invitations had promised the union of 2 great houses, and the guests had come to see it. The bankers and the developers, and the old Gangnam families, circling the room with champagne, trading the small cruelties that passed for conversation among people who measured one another in square meters of Cheongdam land. Word had gone quietly around that the famous silent backer of Baeksan would appear tonight in the flesh, for the first time ever, and the curiosity of it charged the air like weather. No one had ever seen the principal of the fund. Some said it was a foreign pension. Some said an old man in Busan. The cleverest guessed a syndicate of banks. Not one of them guessed a woman, and certainly not the woman who at that very moment was stepping out of a black car beneath the hotel's marble portico, alone, handing her stone-gray coat to a valet, and walking toward the ballroom at an unhurried pace, as though she had all the time in the world. Because tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she did. They were all waiting for the same person. None of them knew her face. Relax, Madame Okhi murmured to her son through her teeth. When the fund's principal arrives, you bow, you thank them. The Min contracts are signed by midnight, and this family is untouchable for another generation. Smile, Tae-jun. We have won. At 2 minutes past 8, the great doors opened. There was no announcement at first, only a change in the air, the way a room quiets before it knows why. A woman walked in alone. She wore a gown the color of carved stone, severe and perfect, and she moved through the glittering crowd without hurry, without searching, the way water moves downhill, certain of where it is going. Her dark hair was swept up and fixed with a single ornament of green jade. She was not the largest presence in the room, she was simply the one the whole room slowly turned toward, without understanding that it did. Kang Taejun saw her, and the fixed smile fell off his face and shattered somewhere on the marble floor. That's... His voice came out strangled. Mother, that's... Madame Aki saw her too, and the color drained from beneath her powder. Suha? It was barely a breath. What is she? How did she even get in here? For that first endless moment, they only saw the gray mouse. The meek little wife they had thrown into the rain, somehow scrubbed up and led into their party, and the horror on their faces was the small, ordinary horror of a social embarrassment, a stain about to spread across their perfect night. A ripple went through the nearer tables. Guests who had met the meek young Kang wife at some past function frowned, half recognizing her, unable to reconcile that gray little memory with the woman crossing the floor now, who wore authority the way other women wore perfume. Whispers began, and died, and began again. Madame Oki half rose from her seat, one jeweled hand lifting, meaning to have security remove the embarrassment quietly before it could reach the dais. She was too slow. Everyone, that night, would be too slow. Then the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, beaming, and reading from his gilded card, and the ordinary horror became something else entirely. Distinguished guests, it is our profound honor to welcome tonight's guest of honor, the principal and chairwoman of the Chunghae Holdings Group, the sole benefactor whose faith has sustained Baeksan Engineering these 6 years. Please, warmly welcome, Chairwoman Ryu Suha. The name landed in the silence like a stone into a still pond. For a moment nobody applauded, because nobody understood, except the 3 people on the dais to whom the name meant the end of the world. Kang Taejun swayed on his feet. Madame Okhi's jeweled hand closed slowly around the stem of her glass, until it seemed it might snap. And Min Sang-woo, who had spent the last hour reading an investigator's report in a parked car, went very still, because he alone had arrived already half-knowing, and half-knowing had not prepared him in the least for the sight of it made flesh. The discarded daughter-in-law, mounting the dais of the family that had thrown her out, wearing the name of the fund that owned every one of them. Suha stopped at the foot of the dais and looked up at them, at her husband, at his mother, at the woman in white, and she did not smile cruelly, and she did not raise her voice. She simply let them look at her, and let the understanding arrive at its own pace, watching it cross their faces, one by one, like a shadow moving over a field. "Good evening," she said. Her voice carried without effort in the vast quiet room. "I understand this family has been very eager to meet me. I do apologize for keeping you waiting. It has been a difficult week. I buried my grandmother on Tuesday." Taejun's mouth worked. "Suha, I don't understand." "No," she agreed. "You never did. That was rather the point of me." She climbed the 3 low steps onto the dais, unhurried, so that she stood among them now, level with them, where they had never once permitted her to stand. "Let me make it simple, since we are among friends. The fund that has kept Baeksan Engineering alive for 6 years, the money without which your company would have collapsed before I ever married into it, belongs to me. It always belonged to my family. Every roof over your heads, every car, every crate of lilies in this room tonight was paid for with my grandmother's money, which is now mine." She turned her head slightly. "You told me, Taejun, on more than one night, that without this family I was nothing. I have thought about that a great deal. I would like you to think about it now too, because it was always precisely the other way around." Madame Okhi found her voice at last, and it came out shrill, cracking at the edges. "This is a lie. This is some scheme, some trick. She was our son's wife. She is nobody. She came from nothing." "I came from your kitchen," Suha agreed. "You put me there yourself. It was a very good vantage point, as it turned out. One hears everything from a kitchen. One learns which guests matter and which accounts are overdue, and exactly how frightened a proud family becomes when the money begins to run thin." She turned her gaze on Taejun, and her voice gentled, which was somehow far worse than if she had shouted. I made your favorite soup on our last night. Do you remember? Our third anniversary. I set 2 places. You couldn't even look at me, while your mother read out the terms of my disposal. The room was utterly silent now, 400 people holding 400 breaths. I did not come here to shout at you, Taejun. I came so that all these good people, whose respect your family has spent a fortune trying to buy, could watch you finally understand what you threw away. That is all. Consider it understood. Min Sang-woo stepped forward, sharp and cold. So it is true, he said. Baeksan is insolvent. It has been a hollow shell held upright by a stranger's money for years. He rounded on Madame Oki, his voice rising. You paraded my daughter in front of 400 people to marry into a bankruptcy. You would have chained her to a dead company and called it an alliance. Mr. Min, Madame Oki's composure was cracking like river ice in spring. Mr. Min, there has been a misunderstanding. The company is sound. The accounts belong to her. Min Sang-woo flung a hand toward Suha. Ask her. Ask the woman you threw into the street whether your accounts are sound. Every eye in the ballroom turned to Suha. She let the silence stretch a moment longer, and in that silence a whole world quietly ended for the Kang family. They are not sound, she said simply. Baeksan has been technically insolvent for 2 years. I could call in its debts tonight, from this stage, with a single telephone call, and by morning, this family would own nothing at all. She looked at Min Dahae, still frozen in her white gown. You need not worry, Miss Min. There will be no wedding. You have been spared a great deal more than you know. Dahae, to her credit, recovered fastest of them all. She looked from her ashen father to the ruined Kangs, to the woman in stone gray, and she gave a short, disbelieving laugh, and gathered her white skirts. Well, she said, how practical. And she walked off the dais and out of the story, which was the wisest thing anyone named Min did that evening. A few guests, sensing which way the wind had turned, had already begun quietly gathering their coats. There is no creature on earth quicker to abandon a sinking house than a Gangnam social climber, and the Kang's table was, very visibly, going down by the bow. But her father was not so wise. Min Sang-woo had come tonight to close a deal, and men like him did not lose gracefully. Humiliated before the whole of Gangnam, watching his careful reputation curdle in real time, he turned on the true source of his ruin, and his voice dropped to something quiet and dangerous. You think you've won something here tonight, chairwoman? He said the title like a curse. A clever entrance. A little theater. But I have spent 1 hour reading about your grandmother's methods, and I know how a fortune like Chunghae's is truly built. The quiet loans, the companies kept alive and then swallowed. What you did to Baeksan has a name in the regulations, and it is not charity, it is manipulation of a distressed asset. I have friends at the Financial Supervisory Service, old friends. His smile was a thin and terrible thing. By morning, everyone in this room will be asking whether the grieving heiress of Chunghae is not, in fact, a criminal. Enjoy your night. It may be the last good one you have. A gasp moved through the nearer tables. Some of the guests, who a moment before had been quietly savoring the ruin of the Kang family, now glanced at one another uncertainly, for Min Sang-woo was a man with real friends in genuinely dangerous places, and a threat from him was not the empty bluster of a cornered husband. Even Nam Do-ha, near the doors, went briefly still. For the first time all evening, the outcome seemed to hang in the balance, and the whole glittering room leaned toward the woman in stone gray to see what she would do. And there, in front of 400 witnesses, the trap that Suha thought she had sprung closed quietly around her own ankle. For one heartbeat, the ballroom held its breath, and Kang Tae-jun felt a wild, drowning flicker of hope, that even now, even here, the woman he had thrown away might yet be pulled back down into the ruin she had climbed out of. Then Ryu Suha smiled, and it was the same quiet, tender, unsettling smile she had given them at the door on the night of the rain, and Min Sang-woo's confidence faltered for the first time all evening. Mr. Min, she said, almost gently, You are a careful man. I respect that. So let me save you a telephone call to your old friends, and save myself a tedious morning." She did not raise her voice, but the whole room leaned in to catch it. "You are correct, that there is a name in the regulations for buying a distressed company's debt in secret. There is also a name for doing it transparently, with every filing lodged, every disclosure made, every regulator informed in advance. My grandmother was many things, Mr. Min, but she was never sloppy. Every one that flowed into Baeksan was documented and reported, for 6 years, to the very agency whose friends you intend to call. I could recite the filing numbers, but it is a party, and I would hate to bore our guests." She let that settle. "As for your friends at the service," she went on, "you should know that Chunghae has been their single largest cooperative disclosure partner for the better part of 2 decades. When you telephone them in the morning to report me, they will already have my grandmother's file open on the desk, because I sent it to them myself, this afternoon, before I dressed for dinner. I do so like to arrive somewhere." And here her eyes moved, just once, over the wreck of the Kang family, already 3 steps ahead of the room. Nam Do-ha, standing quietly near the great doors where she had been the whole time, inclined her head a fraction. It was done. Min Sang-woo understood, all at once, that he had brought a lit match to a woman who had already drowned the field, and the last of the color went out of his face, and he said nothing further at all. There was nothing further to say. He had walked into that ballroom the richest and most careful man in it, and he understood now that the carefulness had been an illusion, that he had spent the whole evening being maneuvered by a woman he had dismissed, 1 hour before, as a domestic embarrassment. It is a particular kind of ruin, to be outplayed and to know it in the same instant, in public, with no move left anywhere on the board. Min Sang-woo had inflicted that exact ruin on other men, across a long career. He had simply never imagined it could be done to him, and certainly not by the quiet one, the one everyone always overlooked. He collected his coat and his humiliation and left, and he did not look back, and that was the end of the danger. The ballroom, which had gathered to celebrate an alliance, emptied instead in the stunned, buzzing way of a crowd that knows it has witnessed something it will be retelling for years. By morning, the whole of Gangnam would know. The Kang family had thrown a fortune out into the rain, and the rain had come back wearing jade and carrying the deed to their lives. Reputations in that world were built over generations and demolished in a single evening. The Kang's demolition took less than 1. Suha turned, finally, to the family that had made her small. Madame Uk-hee had sunk into a gilded chair, her gold dress pooling around her like something spilled. Kang Tae-jun stood alone in the middle of the dais where his whole future had been standing an hour ago, and there was nothing left in his face now but the dawning, total comprehension of what he had done, and to whom. "Suha," he whispered, "please, whatever I did, we can. There must be something." "There is nothing you need to do," she said, and the strange thing was that she meant it kindly. "That is what you never understood about me, Tae-jin. I never wanted your family's money. I had more of it than your family ever dreamed of. The whole time you were telling me I had none. What I wanted was for one person in that house to be kind to me, when there was nothing to gain by it. Just one." She shook her head slowly. "You had a wife who would have loved you into the ground for a single decent year, and you sent her to eat in the kitchen, and then you sent her out into the rain. That was not a crime, Tae-jun. It was only a waste, but it was your waste, and you will carry it, not me." She stepped down off the dais. At its foot she paused and looked back at them one last time, the husband and the mother, ruined and small in the wreckage of their perfect night. "Baeksan's workers will be protected," she said, and her voice was steel now, no longer gentle. "Every welder, every clerk, every engineer will keep their job and their pension under new ownership. I have already signed it. The people who actually built that company will lose nothing. A beat. You two, however, built nothing at all. You will keep exactly what you earned. Good evening." And she walked the length of the silent ballroom and out through the great doors, and this time no one closed them behind her. She closed them herself. The news reached the Baksan yard the next morning, not as a rumor this time, but as a letter, one for every worker, on unfamiliar crisp letterhead. Chunghae Holdings had acquired the company. No jobs would be lost, pensions were guaranteed and, in fact, quietly topped up from a fund the workers had never heard of. In the canteen where a small, quiet woman had eaten rice among them 2 days before, 400 people read the same letter at the same moment, and a slow, astonished murmur rose to the metal rafters. The foreman named Shin read his twice, and then a third time, and sat down heavily on the bench, because at the bottom, beneath all the legal language, someone had added a single line in her own hand, just for him. Your son should study hard in March. An old debt, repaid. He did not understand it. He never would, but he folded that letter into his chest pocket and carried it there until it wore soft as cloth. 3 days later, they came to beg. Suha received them, because she chose to, in the morning room of the estate on the hillside, the great house her grandmother had left her. Madame Aki and her son were shown in by Ju Yongsik, who bowed to Suha and regarded the visitors with the flat courtesy one extends to people who will not be staying. The two of them looked smaller here, diminished by the high ceilings and the quiet old money, the way Suha had once been diminished in their house. Suha poured the tea herself. It was barley tea, roasted and honest, in her grandmother's celadon cups. She watched Madame Aki recognize it, the boiled grain she had called fit only for servants, and watched the old woman's hand tremble as she lifted the cup, because there was nothing else in the world to do with the moment but drink it. We have nothing left, Madame Aki said, and her voice had lost all its edges. The bank has taken the house. Taejun's father will not leave his bed. I came to ask, only to ask, whether there might be some position, something, anything, for my son. He is not a bad man, Suha. He was only weak. Surely you of all people. I of all people, Suha agreed quietly, and set down the pot. She was silent for a while, turning her own cup in her hands, and Taejun could not lift his eyes from the floor. I am not going to destroy you, she said at last. You seem to expect it, and I understand why, because it is what you would have done, in my place, but I have watched what a life built on that kind of cruelty does to a person. My grandmother built an empire and died a little alone because of it, and she spent her last breath trying to spare me the same. I am not going to spend my one life becoming the two of you. She looked up. So, no, I will not give my former husband a position in my company. He would only resent it, and me, and himself, and it would poison us all, but I will do this. Baeksan's ordinary pension fund, the one for the workers, has a hardship provision. Your husband is a sick old man who once, 30 years ago, actually built things with his hands, before his family taught him not to. He qualifies, his medical care will be covered, not because you deserve it, because I would rather be the kind of person who does it anyway. Madame Oki began, silently, to weep. It was the first honest thing Suha had ever seen her do. Taejun spoke then, for the first time since he had come in. He did not ask for money, or a position, or forgiveness, which was, perhaps, the only decent thing he had done in 3 years. I keep thinking about the soup, he said, very low, staring down at his own hands. The anniversary. You set 2 places. I told myself for years that you were cold, that there was nothing behind all that quiet. It was easier than admitting I had never once looked. He lifted his eyes, and they were wet, and empty of everything but understanding, which had arrived far too late to be worth anything at all. You would have loved me even poor, wouldn't you, if I had let you? Yes, Suha said simply. That was the whole tragedy of it. She refilled his cup. Drink your tea. It's good for the cold. Then Mr. Ju will see you out. When they had gone, the house was very quiet. Suha stood at the tall window with her cold cup of barley tea and looked out over the garden her grandmother had planted, and she found that she felt no triumph, only a wide and settled calm, like a room after the furniture has finally been put where it belongs. She had not unpacked the suitcase. It still sat in the marble foyer of the great house, the one worn case with the broken caster that held everything she had owned on the night they threw her out. Ju Yongsik had offered a dozen times to have it carried up, or thrown away, or replaced with something befitting the chairwoman of Cheonghae. Each time she had told him to leave it exactly where it was. She wanted to see it every morning when she came down the stairs. She wanted to remember the woman who had dragged it through the rain, worth nothing at all if you measured her the way they did. She never intended to measure anyone that way again. That evening, she climbed the hill behind the house to the new grave, the earth still raw and not yet settled, and she sat beside it in the last of the light, the way she had once sat at her grandmother's bedside. She did not say very much. She told the old woman that Baeksan's workers were safe. She told her that the family had come to beg, and that she had given them tea and not cruelty, and she thought, though she could not be certain, that somewhere Yoon Sonja was both proud and a little exasperated, which had always been the exact shape of her love. "You could have simply told me," Suha said to the quiet stone. "All those years, you could have just said that you loved me." The wind moved in the pines above her. "But then," she admitted, "I would never have learned what I was worth without any of it. So thank you, truly, for all of it." It was what she had said to the Kangs at the door on the night of the rain, the very same 3 sentences, and only now, saying them to the one person in the world who had earned them, did she understand that she had meant them all along, only never for the people she had said them to. Seon Jae-ha found her at the window as the light was going gold. "The workers' transfer is finished," he said. "All 400. The foreman you underlined, Shin, they've made him site manager. His son starts university in March." He came to stand beside her, a careful arm's length away, the way he always did. "Your grandmother would be unbearable right now, you understand." Insufferably proud. Suha laughed, softly, and it startled her how easily it came now. "Stay for dinner," she said, watching the garden and not him, and feeling the old fear rise. The one that said kindness always had a price, and setting it gently aside, because she was learning, slowly, that sometimes it did not. "It's only barley tea and whatever the kitchen has, nothing befitting a chairwoman." "That," said Jae-ha, "sounds like the best offer I've had in 11 years. They stood together at the window as the servants began, somewhere below them, to lay a small table for 2. It was not a grand thing, what was starting between them. It had none of the fanfare of the wedding she had once been thrown out of. No 400 guests, no lilies by the crate, no alliance of houses. It was only a tired man, and a woman learning to be unafraid, and a pot of barley tea, and the enormous quiet after a long storm. Suha thought it might be the first true thing anyone had ever offered her, without first weighing what she was worth. She decided to let herself keep it. She reached up and touched the jade hairpin at the back of her hair, not to remember who she was this time, but simply because it was hers, and she was, at last, exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the last of the rain was long gone, and the lights of the whole city were coming up gold below the hill, and every single one of them, had they only known it, sat on land that in one way or another belonged to the quiet woman at the window, the one they had once thrown away. Ryu Suha did not destroy the people who discarded her. She simply stopped being small enough to fit in the box they had built for her, and the box, it turned out, had been the only thing holding them up. Her grandmother told her once to never let a room see the whole board, to let them mistake a queen for a pawn. She had played the pawn for 3 long years. She had been the queen the entire time. If this story moved you, if you believe the quiet ones are the ones who hold all the real power, and that dignity is the sharpest revenge there is, then do her justice. Hit that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. And tell me in the comments, what was the exact moment you knew the Kang family had already lost? I'll see you in the next one.